The wind in northern Montana always had a way of speaking to people, soft in the mornings, harsh by noon, and lonely by sundown. It swept over the dry grass and weathered fences of the Callahan Ranch, where the only sound that broke the silence was the cry of a newborn and the low rumble of cattle moving in the pasture. Jacob Callahan stood on the porch, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the hills that stretched beyond his land. It had been 3 months since his wife, Emily, passed during childbirth. 3 months of sleepless nights, of his baby daughter's wails echoing through the old house, of trying to do everything alone and failing. The ranch hands did their best, but none of them knew how to handle a baby. They could fix fences, break horses, and manage feed trucks, but a tiny infant? That was a different world entirely. Jacob had never felt so out of his depth. He was a man who'd once tamed wild mustangs, but his own daughter's cries could break him in seconds. That morning, he stood at the edge of the porch, watching as a dusty old pickup rattled down the long gravel road leading to his house. He didn't remember expecting anyone, but then he did recall the message his sister, Mary, had sent 2 days ago from town. "I found someone who might help with the baby and the kitchen. She's different, but she's kind. Give her a chance." The truck came to a halt, coughing out a cloud of dust. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, broad-shouldered, her figure solid, with round cheeks reddened by the cold. She wore a faded flannel shirt and carried an old duffel bag that looked like it had seen more years than she had. Jacob frowned slightly. He wasn't expecting, her. She walked toward the porch, her boots crunching on the gravel. When she reached the steps, she paused, clutching the strap of her bag tightly. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked softly. Her voice carried a gentle warmth, the kind that could calm a crying child. "That's right," Jacob said, his tone polite but distant. "You must be the woman Mary sent." She nodded. "Yes, sir. My name's Clara. Clara Jenkins. I used to cook for the Bennett family before they moved out to Idaho. Mary said you might need some help here." Jacob studied her for a moment. She looked about 35, maybe a few years younger, with a kind face and eyes that had seen enough of life to understand pain without needing it explained. Inside the house, the baby began to cry again, sharp and restless. Clara turned her head toward the sound instinctively, her expression softening. "Is that her?" "Yeah," Jacob sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's Lily. Been crying like that since 4 this morning." Clara hesitated, her hand still clutching the strap of her bag. Then, in a quiet voice, one that trembled slightly, not from fear but from old wounds, she said the words that would stay in Jacob's mind for a long time. "No one wants a fat girl, sir, but I can nurse the baby." Jacob blinked, unsure how to respond. Clara smiled nervously, trying to mask the sting behind her words. "I mean, I used to help with babies back home. My sister had 5 of them, and I looked after each one. Folks don't hire me much for fancy events or house parties, but I know how to cook, clean, and calm a child. That's worth something, I hope." Jacob looked at her again, really looked, at the way her hands trembled slightly, the hopeful look in her eyes that begged not for pity, but for a chance. "Come inside," he said finally. "It's cold out." The inside of the ranch house was quiet, save for Lily's cries echoing from the back room. Dishes lay piled in the sink, laundry stacked on a chair, and half-eaten meals sat forgotten on the counter. The house had once smelled like Emily's apple pie. Now it smelled like coffee and silence. Clara set her bag down and looked around, then at Jacob. "You've been doing this all by yourself?" He gave a small nod. "Trying to." She moved toward the sound of the crying, her steps light, like she didn't want to disturb the air. When she reached the nursery, she paused at the doorway. The room was simple: crib by the window, a faded pink blanket, and a framed picture of Emily on the nightstand. The baby lay in her crib, red-faced and wailing, little fists trembling that Clara's face softened completely. Without a word, she reached into the crib and lifted the baby with natural ease, swaying gently. Hey, little one. It's all right. You just miss your mama, huh?" Her voice turned to a soft hum, not a song, just a tune carried from memory. Slowly, the baby's cries faded into small whimpers, then silence. Jacob stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, watching. He didn't know why, but for the first time in weeks, he felt something lift from his chest, something like peace. When Clara turned around, She looked almost shy under his gaze. She just needed some warmth, she said quietly. He nodded. Guess you're right. She smiled faintly. Babies don't care about much, just love and food. And maybe a clean blanket. That evening, Clara cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just beef stew and cornbread. But the smell filled the house in a way that made Jacob feel like home had returned, if only for a little while. The ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse came in for supper, curious about the new woman. They greeted her politely, though one or two of them whispered under their breath, their eyes flicking toward her size. Clara heard it, of course. She always did, but she pretended not to. Instead, she focused on feeding them, smiling when one of the younger hands said, "Ma'am, this is the best meal we've had since Mrs. Callahan." "Thank you," she replied softly, wiping her hands on her apron. After supper, when everyone had gone, she started washing dishes. Jacob came in from the porch, leaning against the doorframe. "You don't have to do all that tonight," he said. "I like ending the day with clean dishes," she replied, not looking up. "Makes tomorrow feel fresh." He smiled slightly at that. "You talk like you've been through a few tomorrows." She chuckled. "More than I care to count, sir." There was something about her, unpolished but steady, humble yet strong. Jacob didn't know how to explain it, but the house felt different with her in it. Less hollow. Later that night, after the baby was fed and asleep, Clara went to her small guest room. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The round face, the thick arms, the worn eyes. "No one wants a fat girl," she whispered again, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But maybe this time, someone needs one." Outside her window, the wind rustled through the grass, carrying the distant lowing of cattle and the soft murmur of a man walking the porch with his thoughts. Jacob couldn't sleep. He found himself standing by Lily's crib, watching her breathe softly under the glow of the moonlight. He remembered the way Clara had held her, the way the child had quieted instantly, and how, for the first time in weeks, the house hadn't felt haunted by loss. He looked toward the hallway, where a faint light still glowed from the guest room. He wanted to thank her again, to say something that made sense, but words never came easily to him. So instead, he whispered to his daughter, "Looks like we've got someone watching over us now, kiddo." The next morning came with frost on the windows and the smell of biscuits baking in the oven. Jacob walked into the kitchen, rubbing his hands together, surprised by the warmth, both literal and otherwise. Clara stood at the stove, humming the same tune she'd used to calm Lily. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, and her apron was already dusted with flour. "Mornin', Mr. Callahan," she greeted with a shy smile. "Hope you don't mind. I found your coffee tin." "Not at all," he said, taking in the scene. "You sure make this place feel alive again." She blushed faintly, focusing on the pan. "That's what I aim for. Life's better when there's breakfast on the table." They ate quietly, the baby gurgling softly in her cradle beside them. It was the first peaceful morning Jacob had had since Emily's death. When the ranch hands came by later, they found the kitchen full of laughter, Clara telling a story about her small-town childhood, Jacob actually smiling. It startled them. The boss hadn't smiled in months. That night, when the sky turned golden and the sun dipped behind the hills, Jacob found Clara sitting on the porch with Lily in her arms, rocking gently. "You've got away with her," he said softly. Clara looked up, smiling faintly. "Babies can feel hearts, sir. Yours just needs rest." Jacob didn't reply. He just sat down beside her, the wooden boards creaking beneath their boots. The baby cooed softly, the world painted in orange light. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They didn't have to, because in that quiet moment, with the scent of hay in the wind, the cry of an owl in the distance, and a baby safe between them, something unspoken began to grow. Not love. Not yet. But maybe the start of something that could become love. Slow, steady, and honest. Like the land itself. As the last light faded, Clara whispered to the sleeping baby, "You're safe, little one." And Jacob, without realizing it, whispered back, "So are you." The first snow came early that year. Montana skies had a way of turning gray without warning, and before anyone could blink, the ground outside Callahan Ranch was dusted with white. Clara woke up before dawn, as always. Her breath misted in the cold air while she stoked the fire in the stove, moving quietly so she wouldn't wake the baby or Jacob. The house still felt too big sometimes, too filled with memories that weren't hers. But she was grateful to be there. Every morning she thanked God for the simple things: warmth, work, and the sound of a healthy baby. By the time the coffee pot bubbled, Jacob came downstairs. He was dressed in his usual flannel and denim, his face rough with stubble and cold wind. He nodded to her like he always did. That small, quiet greeting that somehow said everything and nothing at once. "Mornin', Clara." "Mornin', Mr. Callahan," she replied, setting a steaming cup in front of him. "You're up early. Calves need movin' to the lower pasture before the storm hits." He glanced toward the window. "Weather says we'll get 10 inches by nightfall." Clara looked out too, her hands wrapped around her own mug. "Then I'll make something hearty for supper. You'll need it." Jacob gave a small smile, something that came easier now. "You always think ahead." She shrugged, smiling faintly. Habit of women who've had to look after others their whole lives. Their mornings had grown familiar, almost comfortable. The rhythm of the house had changed since she arrived. Laughter mixing with baby giggles, the smell of fresh bread instead of cold coffee. The ranch hands teased Jacob about it now and then, saying things like, "Boss, the cook's got this place running better than you do." He'd just shake his head and tell them to mind their work. But deep down, even he couldn't deny how much she'd done. Still, Clara always kept her distance. She never lingered too long when their eyes met, never spoke more than was polite. Part of her feared that if she did, she'd start believing she belonged, and that would hurt when the time came to leave. After breakfast, Jacob saddled his horse and rode out into the snow with his men. Clara stayed behind, tidying the house and tending to Lily. The baby had started smiling now, big, toothless grins that made every sleepless night worth it. "You look just like your daddy when you smile," Clara whispered, brushing a finger over the baby's soft cheek. "Strong but gentle. He misses your mama, you know? But he's trying to." By late afternoon, snow had begun to fall in heavy flakes. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the windows. Clara stood at the porch watching, worry etching across her face. The men were still out there. She prayed quietly, hands clasped against her apron. When headlights finally appeared through the storm, she exhaled in relief. The trucks pulled in, engines growling, tires crunching through ice. Jacob climbed out first, his coat dusted white, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "Got him all moved," he said, stamping his boots at the door. "One calf gave us trouble, but we made it." "Thank goodness," Clara said softly. "You're all frozen. Come warm up. Supper's almost ready." The smell of stew filled the air, thick with herbs and slow-cooked beef. Jacob sat by the fire while she ladled food into bowls. Lily gurgled happily from her cradle nearby, and for a while, the house felt less like a ranch and more like a home. When dinner ended and the ranch hands returned to their bunkhouse, only Jacob, Clara, and the baby remained. Snow pressed against the windows, muffling the world in silence. "Storm's picking up," Jacob said, glancing outside. "Might be a long night." Clara wiped her hands on a towel. "Then we'll ride it out, same as folks do." He chuckled softly. "You talk like you've done this before." She looked at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "I've been through harder winters than this, Mr. Callahan. You just keep the fire going, and faith does the rest." Jacob watched her for a long moment. The way she moved, steady and sure, the way she spoke with quiet conviction. Emily had been gentle, refined, the kind of woman who painted flowers and read poetry. Clara was different, earthier, stronger, someone who knew how to survive. He didn't know what to make of the feelings that stirred inside him. He told himself it was gratitude, maybe admiration. But when she looked up and smiled at him, something deeper flickered behind his ribs, something he wasn't ready to name. Later that night, the storm cut the power. The house went dark except for the soft orange glow of the fire. Lily stirred, whimpering. Clara went to her, rocking gently, humming the same lullaby she always did. Jacob sat nearby, his eyes fixed on her silhouette, the way her voice filled the quiet, the way her strength felt like warmth itself. "You've got a gift," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "Me?" He nodded. "With her. With this house. Feels like you've been here longer than a few months." Clara smiled faintly, though her eyes turned a little sad. "That's kind of you to say, but I know I'm just passing through." "Who says that?" She hesitated, looking at the baby. Folks don't keep people like me long, Mr. Callahan. I'm the kind of woman people hire when they're lonely, then forget once things feel right again. Jacob frowned. I don't see it that way. That's 'cause you're a good man, she said softly. But the world don't see women like me as much more than help. Or a joke. The fire crackled between them. Jacob wanted to say something, to tell her she was wrong, that she had more grace in her than most women he'd known. But the words caught in his throat. Outside, the wind screamed louder. Inside, the baby stirred again, and Clara rose, swaying gently until Lily quieted once more. When she turned back, Jacob was still watching her. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the storm outside seemed to disappear. The next morning brought a white silence across the ranch. Snow blanketed everything. Fences, barns, even the old tractor half buried near the shed. Jacob shoveled the porch while Clara made breakfast. When he came in, stamping the snow off his boots, he saw her bent over the cradle, laughing softly as Lily grabbed at her apron strings. The sound of that laughter hit him harder than he expected. It filled the empty spaces of his heart that he thought had died with Emily at lunch. He found himself telling her stories about his younger days, about learning to ride bareback, about the time he'd gotten caught in a blizzard with his brother. She listened with bright eyes, nodding at every word. You've had quite a life, Mr. Callahan, she said. He chuckled. Still do, I reckon. When she looked at him, really looked, there was something warm in her gaze, something she quickly turned away before he could notice. But he noticed. That night, after she'd gone to bed, Jacob sat alone by the fire, staring at the photo of Emily on the mantel. I don't know what you'd think of all this, he murmured. But she's good, Em. Real good. Lily sleeps when she's around. The house feels alive. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel anymore, but I think you'd understand. A few days later, a snowplow cleared the road to town. Clara hitched a ride to the market with one of the hands to buy supplies. When they arrived, word had already spread, as gossip often does in small towns. She's working for the Callahan widower, whispered one woman near the bakery. Heard she's got the baby Callan her mama already. Clara heard them, but said nothing. She just smiled politely and kept shopping. Still, her heart pinched. She'd learned long ago that townsfolk had a way of twisting kindness into rumor. When she returned to the ranch, she found Jacob splitting firewood outside. How was town? He asked. Cold, she said simply. Then, after a pause, and talkative, he looked up, reading between her words. They talking about us? They're talking about you, mostly, she said. And who's keeping your house now? Jacob's jaw tightened. Small towns can be cruel that way. She smiled faintly, brushing snow from her coat. It's all right. I've been called worse. But Jacob stepped closer, his voice firm. You don't deserve that, Clara. You've done nothing but bring peace back into this house. Don't let them make you feel less. Her eyes softened at that, not because of what he said, but because of the way he said it. Like he meant it. That evening, the ranch hands noticed something different. The boss seemed lighter. He talked more, even laughed. Clara hummed while she cooked, and the air around them carried a quiet warmth that winter couldn't touch. When Lily took her first real laugh a week later, a pure, joyful sound that filled the kitchen, both Clara and Jacob looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh too. It was small, but it was everything. That night, as the stars came out over the frozen fields, Jacob stood on the porch, watching his breath in the cold. Clara joined him, wrapped in a shawl. She's sleeping sound tonight, she said softly. Because of you. He replied. She shook her head. Because of love, Mr. Callahan. Doesn't matter where it comes from, just that it's there. He looked at her, eyes thoughtful. You ever think maybe you were meant to be here? Clara smiled, her breath forming clouds in the night. I don't think I'm meant for any place, sir. I just go where I'm needed. Jacob turned back toward the horizon, his jaw set, but his eyes gentle. Maybe this time you're both. And for the first time, Clara couldn't find the words to answer. They stood in silence, the stars glimmering above the white fields. Two souls who'd known loss and loneliness, standing side by side, learning slowly that maybe, just maybe, healing was something you could share. The wind shifted, carrying the faint cry of a coyote from the hills, and Jacob's voice broke the quiet. Clara, he said softly, you ever stop thinking no one wants you? Not even for a second. You remember this. You're wanted here. By this house. By that little girl and by me. She froze, her heart thudding so hard she could barely breathe. Then, without turning, she whispered, "I'll remember." And beside them, the snow kept falling, gentle, endless, and pure, like a promise neither of them yet knew how to keep. Winter lingered longer than anyone expected that year. The days stretched gray and cold, the kind that made the air bite and the nights feel endless. Yet inside the Callahan Ranch house, something had changed, something that made even the coldest morning bearable. Clara noticed it in the small things first. The way Jacob lingered in the kitchen just to talk before heading out to the barn. The way his voice softened when he said her name. The way he'd sometimes find excuses to check on her. Need another log for the stove? Or you got enough coffee, Clara? She'd smile and nod, pretending not to notice how he always waited a little too long before walking away. Lily, now almost 6 months old, had grown into a chubby, bright-eyed baby who loved to be carried. Her favorite spot was Clara's arms, and, to Jacob's surprise, sometimes his too. He was getting better with her. Less afraid. More like a father again. One morning, Clara found him by the crib, lifting the baby awkwardly under the arms while mumbling, "All right now. No crying. Daddy's got ya." She leaned on the doorframe, smiling quietly. "You're getting the hang of it." He turned, grinning sheepishly. "She still cries every time I pick her up. That's 'cause she knows you're nervous. Babies feel that." He chuckled, rocking Lily gently. "She's got your calm." Clara looked down, her cheeks warming. Maybe she's just learning from both of us. They stood like that for a moment, Jacob holding his daughter, Clara watching with that soft, glowing fondness that had become second nature. There was something complete in that picture, something that felt like family, even if neither dared say it aloud. As winter thawed into spring, life on the ranch grew busier. Calving season began, and the fields turned muddy with new life. Jacob worked long hours, and Clara took on more than her share. Cooking for the men, washing endless clothes, tending to Lily, and even helping feed the animals when the ranch hands were short. Jacob hated seeing her tire herself out, but every time he offered to help, she'd wave him off with a laugh. "Mr. Callahan, I've been working since I was 12 years old. A little feed in and washing ain't gonna kill me." He admired her grit, but more than that, he admired her heart. There wasn't a day she didn't smile, even when she was bone-tired. One afternoon, while she was hanging laundry behind the house, he came around the corner carrying a bucket of water. The sun had come out after weeks of gray, casting a golden glow across the hills. Clara's hair had slipped loose from its bun, strands curling around her face as she reached for another shirt on the line. Jacob stopped mid-step. Something about the way the sunlight touched her, the way she looked alive in it, made his chest tighten. "Need a hand?" he asked finally. She turned, startled, then smiled. "You? Help with laundry? Now that's something I never thought I'd see." He grinned, setting the bucket down. "Well, maybe I'm trying to impress the help." She laughed, a soft, genuine laugh that rolled out of her like music. "Careful now, Mr. Callahan. Folks in town already talk enough." "Let him talk," he said, voice steady but kind. She froze for a second, caught off guard by the weight behind his words. He didn't look away, and for the briefest moment, she saw something in his eyes she'd tried not to imagine. Something warm, wanting, but restrained by respect. The silence between them hummed, gentle but charged. Then Lily's cry broke through the air, and the moment scattered like leaves in the wind. Clara smiled, grateful for the interruption. "Guess that's my cue." Jacob nodded, though his eyes lingered as she walked away. That night, after supper, Jacob went out to the barn to check on a mare about to foal. The moon was high, pale against the dark sky. Clara stood at the window, holding Lily, watching the barn light flicker. She found herself whispering softly, "He's a good man, sweetheart. A man like that don't come round twice." Lily blinked up at her, gurgling. Clara smiled. "No, he doesn't know. And maybe that's all right. Some loves are better kept quiet." But life, as it often does, had its own plans. That a week later, Jacob's sister, Mary, came for a visit. She adored Lily but carried that sharp small-town tongue that never missed a detail. After supper, as Clara cleaned the dishes, Mary sat beside her, folding napkins. "You've done wonders here," Mary said, her tone polite but pointed. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Mary smiled tightly. You do more than that. Jacob talks about you often. The hands say he's changed since you came. Clara froze, unsure how to respond. Mary leaned closer. I'm happy he's found peace. Truly. But I hope you understand, folks notice these things. A widower and his cook. People like to make stories. Clara swallowed. I know how towns are, ma'am. I don't mean any harm. I believe you, Mary said softly. But not everyone will. You're a kind woman, Clara. Don't give them reason to hurt you. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Her chest felt heavy, her heart pulled between gratitude and guilt. She'd never intended to take up space in another woman's home, especially not in a place still touched by loss. The next morning, she rose early and started packing quietly, her eyes misty but resolute. Jacob found her folding clothes into her old duffel by the window. What are you doing? He asked, voice low. She didn't look up. I think it's time I move on, sir. Lily's growing strong now, and you're doing fine with her. You don't need me anymore. He stepped forward, disbelief in his tone. You think I don't need you? Clara swallowed hard. You need someone the town respects. Not me. I'm just the cook folks whisper about. Jacob's jaw clenched. You think I care what they whisper? You should, she said softly. You got a name, a ranch, a daughter. You don't need the trouble that comes with me. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Clara, you're talking like you're a burden. You're the only reason this house feels alive again. She finally looked up, tears brimming. That's kind of you, but I know where I stand. I ain't the kind of woman men choose, Mr. Callahan. I'm the one they need for a while, till they don't. Jacob's voice softened. You think I'd ever stop needing you? The room went still. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. He took a slow step closer. You think I don't see how you've changed everything? You think I don't notice how Lily smiles at your voice, or how I? He stopped, his breath catching. Clara's heart pounded. How you what? He looked at her then, really looked, with that same quiet steadiness he'd always had. How I feel better when you're here. Like I ain't just surviving anymore. Like maybe there's something worth living for again. Clara blinked, tears spilling. Don't say that unless you mean it. I mean it. The silence that followed was long and trembling. Neither moved, but everything between them changed. Then, before either could say more, Lily stirred in her crib, crying softly. Clara turned away, wiping her eyes. She needs me. Jacob nodded, his voice low. So do I. She froze at the doorway, her back to him, the words hitting deeper than he could know. That night, she didn't pack again. She stayed, not because she was sure of what would happen, but because her heart told her leaving would hurt worse than staying. Days passed quietly after that, but the air between them carried something new. Small touches, a hand brushing past another, a shared glance at breakfast, a laugh that lasted too long. The kind of moments too fragile to name but impossible to ignore. One evening near sunset, Jacob found her out by the corral, bottle feeding an orphan calf. The golden light painted everything soft. She's got your heart, he said, nodding toward the calf. Clara smiled. Just hungry, same as any baby. He leaned against the fence beside her, his tone quiet. You ever think about starting your own family? She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. Once. Long time ago. But that dream passed me by. He turned to her, his expression gentle. Maybe dreams don't pass us by, Clara. Maybe they just change shape. Their eyes met again. No fear this time, just truth. When he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, she didn't pull away. The world seemed to still. The wind hushed, the earth held its breath, and in that fragile silence, something unspoken finally settled between them. It wasn't a grand confession or a sudden kiss. Just a look that said everything words couldn't. The look of two hearts finding home. And as the sun sank behind the hills, Clara whispered softly, almost to herself. Maybe I was meant to be here after all. Jacob's answer came quiet and sure. You were. The first frost came early that year. It painted the fields with silver in the morning and left the barn roofs sparkling when the sun rose. Jacob woke before dawn, as he always did, to check the cattle and stack firewood by the porch. The ranch had become quieter since Clara came, not in a bad way, but in the kind of quiet that carried peace instead of loneliness. Inside, he could hear her humming to the baby, that same low, comforting tune she sang when the child couldn't sleep. It drifted through the wooden walls and into the cold morning air. For Jacob, it had become the sound of home. He leaned his axe against the fence and stood still for a while, watching the thin curl of chimney smoke rise. Never thought I'd miss that sound, he whispered to himself. For years after his wife's death, he couldn't stand hearing a woman's voice inside the house. It reminded him too much of what he'd lost. But Clara's voice didn't hurt. It healed. When he stepped into the kitchen, she was spooning oatmeal into a bowl while the baby kicked in her arms, laughing at the sound of the metal spoon clinking. "Morning, Mr. Holt," she said, her cheeks flushed from the stove heat. "Jacob," he corrected softly, as he had a few times before. She looked up, unsure whether she'd misheard. "Sorry, sir," he smiled. "You've been here near 3 months now. I think we can drop the Mr. Holt, don't you?" Her smile was small but warm. "Jacob, then," she said, testing the name like it was something rare. He nodded, taking his seat at the table. The moment hung between them quietly, just the crackle of the fire and the baby's happy babbling. There wasn't much that needed to be said. The rhythm of their mornings had its own comfort. Later that day, Clara carried the baby out to the porch while Jacob repaired a fence post near the yard. The air smelled of pine and earth after a light drizzle. The baby cooed at the horses, tiny fingers reaching for everything he saw. Clara laughed softly. Jacob looked up from his work, watching them from a distance. For a long while, he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve another chance at happiness. But seeing Clara out there, her brown hair pinned loosely, her apron fluttering in the breeze, and her laughter wrapping around his child like sunlight, he felt something shift deep inside. That evening, when the sun dipped below the hills, Clara found him still working in the barn. She carried a lantern and a bowl of stew she'd kept warm for him. "You'll make yourself sick staying out here this late," she said gently. He chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. "I could say the same to you. Shouldn't you be resting?" She smiled, setting the bowl down on a crate. "I couldn't sleep knowing you hadn't eaten." Jacob took the bowl, the warmth soaking into his calloused hands. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, the sadness that had lived in his eyes began to ease. "You've done more for this place than anyone ever did," he said quietly. "I don't think I've said thank you enough." "You don't have to," she replied. "This ranch, it's become home." The word home lingered between them. He set the bowl aside, his heart thudding harder than it should have. "Clara," he said slowly, "you ever think about leaving this place someday? Maybe finding something better than cooking for an old widower and his boy?" She lowered her gaze. "Better," she repeated softly. "No, Jacob, I've never had better than this." For a moment, the silence in the barn was heavier than any words could carry. The lantern light flickered across the wooden beams, casting golden shadows over their faces. Jacob took a small step closer, his rough boots creaking against the hay-strewn floor. "I used to think my life ended the day my wife passed," he said. "But these past months, I've started to see, maybe God wasn't done with me yet." Clara's eyes met his, wide and shining. "Jacob, I ain't saying things I shouldn't," he said quickly, though his voice trembled a little. I want you to know this place ain't the same without you." "I ain't the same." Clara swallowed, her breath catching. "You don't know how much that means," she whispered. Outside, the wind brushed through the dry grass, whispering around the barn doors. Inside, neither of them moved for a long time. Finally, the baby's faint cry broke the stillness from inside the house, calling Clara back. She gave a small nod and turned to go. But before she stepped out, Jacob said softly, "Clara?" She turned. "Thank you for staying." Her lips curved into a gentle smile. "I told you, Jacob, no one wanted me before. But here, I think I'm wanted." He smiled too, though his chest ached in the best way. "More than you know." That night, sleep didn't come easily for either of them. Clara sat by the crib, watching the baby's tiny chest rise and fall, while Jacob stood by the window in his room, staring out at the stars. Both thinking of each other, neither daring to say it aloud yet. The days that followed carried a soft kind of magic, the kind that happens when two hearts quietly begin to fall in sync. When the winter fair came to town, Jacob insisted she join him and the baby. She hesitated, nervous about going out where people might stare at her, but he simply said, "Let him. You belong there same as anyone." At the fair, she held the baby while Jacob bought them hot cocoa. Folks from town gave her curious looks, some kind, some not. She could hear whispers, the way people often talked about her weight, her plain clothes, the fact that she worked for a widower. But when Jacob walked back to her and handed her a steaming cup, his gaze never left hers. "Don't mind him," he said quietly. "They don't see what I see." She blinked, startled. "And what do you see, Jacob?" He smiled faintly. "A woman who brought life back to my home." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away, but her heart swelled as snow began to fall gently over the fairgrounds. Jacob lifted the baby onto his shoulder while Clara laughed softly beside them. For once, she didn't care who was watching. Later that night, when they returned to the ranch, she tucked the baby in and turned to find Jacob standing by the doorway. He hesitated for a long time before speaking. "Clara," he said quietly, "I don't want you thinking I'm saying this out of loneliness or gratitude. I mean it because it's true. You're the heart of this home now." Her breath caught, eyes glistening in the dim light. "Jacob," he took one slow step closer. "I know you've been hurt by how people see you. I used to be blind to that kind of pain too. But when I look at you, Clara, I don't see what they do. I see kindness, strength, and the way you love my boy like he was your own. That's something rare." Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head slightly. "I never thought someone would see me like that." He reached out, his rough hand barely brushing hers. "Then let me be the first." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Just the quiet crackle of the fireplace, the faint whistle of wind outside, and the steady sound of two hearts finally daring to feel. She didn't pull away. She only whispered, "Jacob, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." The baby stirred in the crib, breaking the moment gently. They both turned toward him, and Clara gave a soft laugh through her tears. Jacob smiled. "Guess he's telling us to take things slow," he murmured. Clara nodded, her voice trembling but full of warmth. "Slow sounds just right." That night, when Jacob went to bed, he found himself thanking God quietly. Not for riches, not for success, but for the strange, beautiful grace that had brought a lonely cook into his life and turned his mourning into hope. Outside, snow blanketed the fields in silence. Inside, the old ranch house glowed with warmth. For the first time in years, it truly felt like a home again. The snow stayed late that winter by February. Drifts of white still lined the fences, and the sound of crunching boots echoed every morning as Jacob carried firewood inside. The baby was growing fast, starting to stand, giggling each time Clara clapped her hands and called his name. The house felt alive again. The rooms that once carried only silence and memory now carried laughter, warmth, and the smell of Clara's fresh bread cooling on the counterpart one morning. Clara stood by the window watching the sunrise turn the hills pale gold. Jacob came in quietly behind her, carrying his coffee mug. "Cold morning," he said. She smiled. "It's beautiful, though. The snow looks like it's shining." He nodded. "Yeah, never noticed it much before." She glanced at him, curious. "You've lived here your whole life. How could you not notice?" He shrugged. "Guess I wasn't looking for beauty back then." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Didn't have reason to." She looked away quickly, pretending to fuss with the baby's blanket. Her heart beat faster than she wanted it to. The days passed with quiet rhythm. They fed the horses, chopped wood, mended fences. The baby's laughter followed them wherever they went. Sometimes, when Jacob rode out to the pasture, Clara would stand by the gate and wave as he disappeared over the ridge. Each time he came back, he'd find her waiting, cheeks red from the cold, eyes bright, a pot of stew already simmering on the stove. But small towns have long memories. In Tongues Point one Sunday after church, Clara went to buy flour from the general store. She overheard two women whispering near the counter, Mrs. Dugan and Mrs. Hale, both known for gossip that spread faster than wildfire. "Can you imagine?" one said. "That cook living out there with him all winter. No ring, no shame." "Poor man," the other replied. "Still mourning his wife, and she's taking advantage. You know the kind, desperate for a roof." Clara froze. The words stung harder than she expected. She pretended not to hear, paid for her flour, and walked home through the snow, her steps slower than usual. That night, when Jacob noticed her quietness, he asked, "You all right?" She forced a smile. "Just tired is all." But later, when the baby was asleep, she stood by the kitchen table, staring at the fire. The flicker of light made her eyes glisten. Jacob came in quietly, sensing something was wrong. "You've been quiet all evening. What happened?" She hesitated, then said softly, "I went into town today. Heard some things. Folks are talking." Jacob, his jaw tightened. "About what?" "About us," she whispered. "They think I've done something wrong, living here without." She stopped herself. "I don't want to bring shame to your family's name." Jacob took a slow step toward her. "You've brought nothing but honor to this place, Clara. Don't you let their words tell you otherwise." "But the way they look at me, they don't matter," he interrupted firmly. Then softer, "You matter." She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Then tell me why you keep me here, Jacob. I need to hear it." He stared at her for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Because I can't imagine this home without you anymore," he said. "Because you're family now, to me, to the boy. Because when you came here, I started living again." Tears welled in her eyes. "Jacob." He stepped closer, gently taking her hands. "I know folks will talk. Let 'em. But if you'll stay, I'll make it right." She looked up, unsure. "What do you mean?" He smiled, soft, certain. "I mean, marry me, Clara." The words fell like the gentlest snowfall. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. "You don't have to. I ain't doing this out of pity," he said quickly. "I'm doing it because I love you. You're the kindest, strongest woman I've ever known. You saved my boy, and you saved me." Her tears spilled freely now. "Jacob, no one's ever said they loved me before." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his rough thumb. "Then it's about time someone did." The next morning, when the sun rose over the hills, the ranch looked the same, but everything had changed. Word spread fast, as it always did. But this time, the whispers didn't hurt as much. Folks in town were surprised, even skeptical at first. But when they saw Jacob standing beside Clara at church the next Sunday, her hand in his, the baby in her arms, something softened in their eyes. The pastor smiled as they entered, and Mrs. Dugan, the same woman who had gossiped weeks before, quietly turned her gaze away in shame. Jacob held his head high. Clara didn't hide behind anyone anymore. She stood tall, radiant in her simple blue dress. And when Jacob introduced her as his wife after the service, the small-town chatter turned into warm congratulations. Back at the ranch, life continued in its quiet, steady rhythm. Only now, the air felt lighter, the laughter louder. The baby grew strong, taking his first steps on the porch one sunny afternoon. Clara clapped her hands, laughing, while Jacob scooped the child up, both of them grinning from ear to ear. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, Jacob's arm around her shoulders, the baby asleep in her lap, the sky painted orange and gold over the distant hills. "Hard to believe how far we've come," Jacob said one evening. Watching the horizon, Clara smiled softly. "Sometimes I still think I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's real, Clara. You made it real." She looked at him for a long moment. "Do you ever think your wife would have wanted this? For you to find someone again?" Jacob's gaze drifted toward the sky, where the first stars were coming out. "I think she'd be thankful," he said. "She'd want her boy to grow up with laughter in the house. And she'd be glad I found someone who knows how to love that way." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "You make me believe I was never unwanted," she whispered. He smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You never were, Clara. You were just waiting for someone to see you right." The crickets sang softly in the distance. The air smelled of hay and pine. Inside, the old house glowed with warm light, the kind that comes only from peace earned through pain and love born from kindness. Years later, folks still talked about the widower and the cook, but no one said her name with pity anymore. They spoke of her bread at church suppers, her laughter that filled the ranch, and the way she held that baby like he was the greatest gift on earth. And when people drove past the Holt Ranch at sunset, they'd often see them there, Jacob, Clara, and the boy, sitting on the porch, side by side, as if time itself had slowed to watch the family that love built. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive dressed in perfection. It comes wearing an apron, carrying a crying baby, and whispering softly, "Then stay."